In episode 8 of The Lab, we dive into our data installation series and discuss data's role in hitting. Also, if you have any questions for us, be sure to reach out at any time, jimbopodcast21 at gmail.com. That is jimbopodcast21 at gmail.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition, episode number 8 of the Lab Epstein Hitting Podcast. My name is Jim, and joining me, as always, is renowned hitting instructor, my former coach, professional evaluator, and my co-host, Jake Epstein. I shortened that up this week, by the way. Jake, how are you?
I did. I'm still waiting for all the extra ones that were in there, but that's all right. No, I'm doing well, Jim. Ready to tackle some more topics today. Today should be a good one for all the people out there that are preparing for their kids as they get older and start to possibly enter the professional game and the college game and even the high school game.
Yeah, and one way that the game is evolving is with data, and that's the topic today. It's our first installation of our data series, and we're going to do a bunch of these where we can break down certain statistics of how we can evaluate hitters, how we can help hitters get better. But today we're just going to do an overall view. By the way, the episode last week got pretty good reception, good listenership. We thank you for that, bat path and hand path. Was there anything we missed last week? Because that's a topic that on the surface doesn't seem like there's a lot to go into. But boy, I mean, once we really got into it, there was some stuff there and some tree branches that we grabbed from and touched on that maybe some people didn't really know much about.
I'm not sure we missed anything, but I will say I'm part of a social media group. It's a Facebook group of former major league and minor league players, and I know we've talked about this kind of on the side. It's really cool because it's a group where there's guys in there that were 15-year major league veterans, and then there's other guys like me that were just lowly minor leaguers that kicked it around for a short while and ran out of ability, but played the game for a long time. And one of the members who, it's somewhat of a family, we all rode buses and made $18 a day in meal money, and he posted something about his son, that's, I think, a high school freshman this year, and very similar to what I see all the time. And he had this hand path issue. He was very athletic, but he had this weird crunch with his arms, his elbows and hands, where he couldn't really get extended and stay inside the ball. So even though he let the ball get deep, he pulled everything because the barrel came around his body and left his body a little bit early. So I did like a little voiceover for him and compared him to like a Robinson Cano, and I also had like a Joey Gallo, right? That shows that, look, here's a guy that's a huge man and a power hitter, but here's the move that you need as it relates to hand path. And that thread, got a lot of action, not just me trying to help this guy out, but a lot of people, because it was hand pass, and they're not in the camp of what they're seeing. These are all ex-professionals. And I know many of you have seen Jeff Fry, on Twitter, social media. He makes fun of all the, a lot of the newer aged gurus or whatever that you want to call them, that he calls them out there, and this was a very upper body, a very hand dominant discussion, because that's what a lot of those guys, worked on, and that's what a lot of those guys taught. And I think it is very important that you mix, what these, professional guys and their experiences and what works with them. Very important, and I use them. I probably weigh in the 70 to 80% of what I teach and what I use, because I get results. I'm results oriented with my players. I'm not just science based, or I don't put 100% of everything into data. that I used people from experience. There was, was it? I can't remember the guy's name. He plays for the White Sox, and he was talking about hitting on the MLB network. And he's in there talking about, I'm trying to chop down on the top of the ball. I'm trying to slap the top of the ball with a tennis racket or something he was saying. And Eric Burns said, I get it, but, you did increase your launch angle the last couple days, the last year, or the last 2 years.
Sure.
And he said, I did. And he said, well, how did you do it? If you're not worried about that, and you're thinking every time you're in a cage, you're, trying to hit the tire. Every time you're doing front toss, you're trying to flight everything down. And he said, I changed my mindset. Instead of hitting a line drive the other way, I'm trying to hit a line drive over the center fielder's head. I'm much more aggressive early in the counts, trying to do damage that way. So my natural swing, maybe it's getting the ball in the air more because I'm hitting it out in front more, or maybe I'm staying back more. He said, but honestly, all I did was get into my legs more, which helps get the ball in the air for me. Mm-hmm. And I changed my mindset. So anyway, I feel that, hand path. And again, when we worked out at the lab, my guy that trains with me, Matt Yingle, who played in the Marlins organization for 7-8 years, just a really good teacher, really bright guy. And, he's huge into the legs, and he was kind of not undersized in terms of height, but he's not a big, strong guy, but he had massive power. And he used his legs, so perfectly to build energy and to help him with timing. And the combination of, what he brings to the table, at the lab with lower body and rhythm and kind of driving the engine. And then, my specialty, which is, hand path and consistency, we feel like we make pretty good hitters down there.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I've experienced that personally myself in my playing career. And if you missed last week's episode, I highly recommend that you go back and really take a look and check it out, because we've talked about the legs and the lower body mechanics of the swing, and just the mechanics overall of said swing. But hand path and bat path can never be forgotten. It is so vitally important.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And you can have a ton of bat speed and you can hit a ball high and far off a tee or in front toss. But if you're not consistent with those moves, if you're not efficient and you're not, on plane, so to speak, for a long time, and have the ability to make adjustments with your hand path, because you're going to get fooled so often in baseball, you're not always going to be perfect, then it's a short-lived, 150 average career, and,
that's it.
You got to find something else to do. Yeah, right. They'll replace you pretty quick.
Yes. And if you missed that episode, again, go back and check it out in the archives. Be sure to like and subscribe to the podcast, wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, Google, iHeartRadio app, TuneIn Radio app. And we're also on Stitcher and a couple of other smaller platforms as well. New episodes available every Monday at 9 a.m. Follow Jake and I on Twitter and Instagram. I'm at Jim Tara on both platforms. Jake is at Epstein Hitting. And don't forget that you can email us as well, JimboPodcast21, if you have any questions or if you have any ideas as to what you'd like us to discuss in case we missed anything. So be sure to check that out and feel free to shoot us an email. But we get into our topic today. It's our first installation of our data series. And we're just going to talk a lot overall, not so much statistics and specific data and metrics, but just the overall data and how it has an impact in today's game. You brought up many times about how we used I forget what the computer program name was 10 years ago.
But the JC video.
The JC video. But with that video, you also used to draw a lot of lines to illustrate the torque angle and other smaller things, the foot plant and the angle of what that was to help generate such torque. And you kind of introduced, in a way, the data to the swing and how it can properly be used. Now, some would make an argument that there's too much data or there isn't even not enough data in today's game. But overall, what do you say? What kind of impact do you think data has made in today's game when it comes to hitting?
I think there's different fronts you can look for data. You have a front or a a category that an instructor uses data.
Yeah.
Somebody like myself, or anybody that's a private hitting instructor, and using data to gather information and then to make a player more efficient, stronger, whatever.
Sure.
And then you have data for a high school coach.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have data for college programs, and you have data for professional baseball, and then subcategories of that, scouting and development, and then just overall, major league data. So data is good. Data is great. It gives people information. Too much data is not good, right? I mean,
Right.
It's just kind of what it is. If you put all your eggs in that data basket, without getting your eyes on a player, it doesn't work. So if I were to take, there was somebody I read about who, I don't remember what region it was, but it was a high school coach, and he was like, I do, I'm having tryouts,
Sure.
and I want everybody to use, we have access to Blast, and we have access to Rapsodo for our pitchers and hitters. And really, I don't even need to see the player. All I need to do is see your data, and I can tell if you can play at the high school level, right? So this is, this would cross over to college too. Look, I see that your exit velocity is 100 miles an hour off a tee or 90 miles an hour off the tee. I know you're physical enough to play at the Division I level. I remember seeing a video from, was it Gary Ward? It may have been Gary Ward. It may have been his son. Is it Rocky is his son? This was years ago. And it was, when it was first starting, look, we got a radar gun. If you can hit it 90 off a tee, we'll consider you, if you're a high school player and you hit 90 off a tee, we'll consider you to be able to play at the next level. If you can't create that bat speed at this certain age, it doesn't work. Right. I mean, that was their theory.
Right.
Well, now you have showcases where it's, data stacked upon data, and you have, okay, here's your exit velocity. Well, that ranks you in this category. Here's your speed, and it ranks you into this category. Here's your arm strength, and it puts you in this category for players. And some of that is very good, and some of it is, this is just a special athlete. This is a bigger, stronger 17-year-old than 150-pound 17-year-old.
Sure.
Well, you can't compare those, and that's where scouts come in, or I guess it would be scouts, and say, what is this person going to be like in 5 years?
Yeah.
How are they going to prosper? How are they going to play out? Having maybe gone to college for 3 or 4 years and got bigger. I think I went to college at 6'1" or 6'2", 190 pounds. And my sophomore year, I was 6'5" and 225. Like, that's a different human being. Right. I mean, that was such a different human being that I couldn't catch anymore because I had grown 3 inches and put on, 35 pounds. So you don't know. And when I got drafted out of high school, that was probably what they saw. This kid's kind of a string bean. He's kind of lanky. He's going to, fill out and put on weight. Okay, we'll take a chance on him. So data can be used the right way. I think when you only use it, I think it's very, very dangerous. I think you have to get a feel for a person. I'll tell you what, I've worked with hitters, and I have college coaches say, hey, what do you think of this guy? And I'm like, look, he's a great kid. He's, he works hard. He's not going to get in trouble, on the side. And I'll tell them, look, I haven't seen him play the field. Yeah. Like, I don't know what they throw like. I don't know what they run like. I don't know how they field a ground ball or a fly ball. Yeah. And quite honestly, I've seen some of my players that are excellent hitters, and they perform very, very well at batting practice. Yeah. And I see them in a live setting, and I'm like, that doesn't even look like the same player. Like, what's going on, buddy? Like, let's figure this out. Maybe you need a shrink or a sports psychologist, because when you get in the batter's box, those are different moves. Well, I'm just not as comfortable, or this and that. Well, if you just took data from that kid, they may look like they're going to be an All-American when they're probably never going to see the field because of other contributing factors that may take away from the success of what they do physically.
Well, here's another takeaway too. I was having dinner with a good friend of mine last night, and he said, and I haven't seen him in a while, but when we embraced, hugged, and whatnot, he said, "You're in great shape. It's like you can get back on the field again." And I said, no, I don't think I ever could because I'm not in baseball shape. Well, the same thing correlates to what you were talking about right there where, okay, he's a great athlete, he's strong, has great data. And again, this is where scouts come in. But can he play the game of baseball? There's a difference between being in shape and being in baseball shape, but there's a difference between having great data and actually being able and understanding how to play the game of baseball. Dustin Pedroia, for example, is a baseball player. He's not just an athlete, he's a baseball player. And that's what John Kruk, I think, meant years ago when he said, I'm not an athlete, I'm a baseball player. Because there is a difference.
There is. There's so many different skills that it takes to find the barrel with a ball moving 100 miles an hour.
Yeah.
They're not all physical skills. They're not all skills that can be taught. I wish they were. But a lot of that has to do with relaxation. It has to do with, obviously, eye-hand coordination, how fast your neurotransmitters work to get information from your eyes to your brain to the rest of your body to find that barrel. And maybe there will be data one day that tells us that. I have a good friend, Ryan Harrison, whose dad was the godfather of sports vision. Bill passed on us, I think, a couple years ago, or 1 to 2 years ago. It's just a very, very forward-thinking man that, I remember telling my dad, I think we've talked about that, Harrison. You have the worst vision of any player I've ever tested. And I don't know how many thousands, tens of thousands of professional minor league players he tested, right? Well, how did my dad compete with the worst vision of any baseball player, right? He had to adapt, right? He had to figure out a way to compete. Yeah. Now, what would have happened if he could see? He obviously had those special skills, to find a barrel and create energy and strength and all that. And I don't know. There has to be eyes on the game. It can't be data oriented. Now, you get to the high level, right? Now, all of a sudden, you're a major league.
Well, if you don't mind, if you don't mind, just to cut you off really quick. This is where college baseball can be very fleecing in many, many ways. I mean, there's trends that they follow that they think are correct and they think is going to win you games, and help players develop. Like, for example, when I was in college, the big thing in hitting was get the foot down early. Well, that's kind of gone away. Now the big thing seems to be let's incorporate all this data that we possibly can and see if that will make our players as good as they can be and see if that'll win us more ball games. And they do it without context. And you mentioned the story earlier about that when you grew basically out of being a catcher. I mean, 18 to 22, you're still growing. You're still physically growing. You're getting a little bit of height, but you're filling out, and your body is always developing. So that's why I don't like when colleges just pigeonhole themselves into, okay, now we're a data-driven program, and we're going to offer you a scholarship and feel that you can play at this level based off just your exit velocity off a tee, of all things, and your launch angle.
Yep, I agree. There's different, and it's not a level playing field, right? You have the Vanderbilts of the world that have, wonderful facilities and I guess we could call them smart volunteers, or extra. They're not coaches, but they're analytics teams, right? And we tried to tap into that.
Support staff.
Engineering school. Yeah. Support staff, right? So you have access to people that can provide more information that may be needed. You have a coach that's very bright and likes to use that information and uses his people correctly. So you can be data driven. I think on the pitching side, it might be a little bit more cut and dry. Again, as a pitcher, we're controlling the baseball game. Yeah, we can sit there and chill out. Well, unless they put a clock on them, right? But you could, you're saying, okay, I'm going to throw a slider right here. I have time to get my grip. I have time to, make sure my timing of my windup is good. Whereas a hitter, it's like, oh boy, we got to react to this. So it's a much different game when you're using data because as a hitter, we have many more variables. There was a kid I did a draft report on that, I looked at him like, wow, this guy's not very big at all. He's 18 years old. He's not big. And, he's an outfielder. And then I was like, okay, he's a Vanderbilt commit. I'm like, okay, this guy's obviously, or I shouldn't say commit. He's a Vanderbilt signee, right? Sure, so he's headed there. Yeah. He actually got ink to paper. And then I looked, I got his profile, and I'm like, oh my God, this kid, he ran like a 6.28 or a 6.23. He's probably the fastest guy in the country, right? Well, you know what? With running, data driven, boom, I'd love to put this guy at the top of the lineup to put pressure on people. And you know what? His swing's going to run into balls.
Yeah.
Like he's going to put the ball in play. And I know he's going to go to Vanderbilt, and he's going to be a low line drive hitter, and he's going to create chaos. And I'm like, he's a perfect fit in that lineup, because when you get out of that 1 and 2 hole of that lineup, those dudes rake. They're gap to gap hitters. They're going to have guys that hit, double digit home runs, a bunch of them, and it fits into their plan. But if you just say, you know what, I spoke to a very good friend of mine. Well, I can say who it is because he didn't actually say it. So George Horton is, mentor of mine, friend of mine, just a wonderful human being. Mm-hmm. Anyway, he'll be a Hall of Fame coach. He's at Cal State Fullerton. He was my coach there, and then he went on to University of Oregon and restarted that program. And I remember years back there was, an assistant coach that was with him that said, I feel like I have to get commits. And this was probably 10 years ago, probably 10 years ago, right? It was a while ago. I got to get commits. I got to get them at showcases. I got to get these guys that are big and strong and they hit the ball really hard off the tee. And if I don't get them, someone else will, and I can't miss out on that, even though I haven't really seen them perform in battle, right? I haven't seen them perform in stressful environments. But boy, do they look good hitting a ball off a tee, and they hit it 98 miles an hour. And boy, they're going to fill out and get strong. And gosh, they run really well and they throw really well. I hope that this player can help us in 3 years, because he's having to, get guys that are sophomores, committed to his school. And as we know now, sometimes, those guys end up on campus and sometimes they don't. But he said, I wish I didn't have to do that. I wish I could wait, like when, I'm not sure how it was with you because, obviously I got years on you, but, I didn't sign my letter of intent or have a commitment until, my junior year, until it was signing period.
Yeah.
Like you got courted, if you will, and you talked to people, after that summer of your, you had letters and you maybe talked to people, but nothing was official. You couldn't start your trips until the fall of your junior year. And then you didn't make your decision until your trips were done during the signing period. So it's so different now. I wish it wasn't. I wish there was an easy way to get out of that, but there isn't. From the college side, you have to use that data and say, look, here's a 15-year-old kid. Well, I remember there was a 15-year-old kid 3 years ago, fit the same body type. Here was his data metrics. Is he going to progress like this other kid that went onto a fast track and boom, was an all-conference player for us? Or was it this other kid that petered out and he didn't even step foot on campus? I don't know. And I think when you use data in that sense, maybe it can be very beneficial to, the college coaches for sure in, recruiting.
Yeah. Well, the recruiting process has really changed in just a matter of 10 years. I signed my letter of intent in December of 2007. That was my senior year after being, recruited the summer and fall of 2000, after my junior year of 2007. But it has it has changed with all the new elements that are now put into the college recruiting part of things.
That's right. Yeah. I'm sorry. It's your fall of your senior year, not junior year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think your junior year, a lot of times they had the area code, was in the area code games. That was, something I was fortunate to play in, was the summer of, I think, our junior year. And it was like, if you made that team and you played in August, it was like, and it's still at Blair Field. Still, it's a big hoopla now, but I think I don't know if we talked about the Dave Winfield story at some point.
We have not. Please share. I'm interested. I love
Okay. So that's where I got, so my favorite, so there's two Dave Winfield stories. He spoke at Area Code when I was 17. I remember this. So we had kind of guest speakers that talked to us. And I remember sitting in the outfield and he was talking to us. And, I have the first Dave Winfield story, which I think I mentioned in an earlier podcast, was, maybe I didn't, but when I'm hitting good, when I'm in a hot zone, he used to bring out like a camcorder, right? Back in the day, a camcorder, you can use your phone now. And he used to interview himself. What are you feeling right now when you get in the box? What are you eating for breakfast? How are you sleeping? How many hours of sleep are you getting right now? What time are you going to bed and when are you waking up? What is your pregame routine? with your drills. And he would interview, and whenever he went into a slump, he would go back and listen to all those fake interviews he had about when he was hitting the ball well. The second one is, if you remember Dave Winfield, I grew up watching him, right? He would get in the box, and just a wonderful athlete, right? 3-sport athlete. I think he got drafted in 3 sports. And he would, and he's 6'7", maybe? He would wipe out. Yeah, he would wipe out the entire batter's box. He'd walk in, he'd take his right leg, and his foot might be the entire width of the batter's box, too. I don't know. He was a large man, right? So he would wipe and swipe all the dirt out of the batter's box one way and then bring it all back in the other way and then push it out of the way. And he said he used to do that because he wanted to get rid of all the 4-letter word that smells bad from the last guy that was in the box. And he's like, I got to wipe his crud out of here because this is my box, and I don't want any of that stink in here from that guy making it out. Anyway, so I don't know why I remember that from and Eric Davis actually spoke to us too at that area code game. But that was kind of the process. Like if your local scout thought you were good enough to make that area code team, then you pretty much were going to have some kind of collegiate offer coming out of that, which was really cool. And it's the same now. The problem is all those kids are committed by the time they get to area code. So they get to area code their junior summer, and they've already committed to a bunch of different schools. So now really it's more for the major league draft. It's not as much for the college coaches, which still go there because they probably have to.
Yeah.
But for the most part, everybody's committed, and it's the pro scouts now that are getting more benefit out of that game because they can see these guys a little bit older.
Yeah.
They didn't, the pro scouts didn't have to make a commitment to these guys. They're waiting until the draft.
Yeah.
And so they can get a little bit more information on them a little bit later. I think it's really beneficial for them.
Well, and I think college coaches go there because it's not National Signing Day, so they don't have anybody signed. They have guys committed, and what they can possibly do is, well, I don't know, maybe, okay, I'm going to pull out with my commitment from that guy because, it's not always fair.
It happens. Yeah. And sometimes it happens with the kids. They get a change of heart. And I will say the college coaches try to, they don't want to have the reputation of the guy that decommits people. Right. So they really stick to that as much as they possibly can because that reputation gets out there and kids know it, right? Oh, you committed to, school X. Well, 60% of their players never step foot on campus. After they commit.
Why is that?
And it's like, okay.
Why is that? You coached at a big SEC school. Why is that?
Because you don't really know how players pan out. Sometimes you commit this guy that looks like a dude because he went through puberty when he was like 13 or 12, and he hasn't grown, and because he hasn't had to work. This kid, he was an early advanced guy, and all of a sudden he kind of, stopped at maybe 5'9". But geez, as a 14-year-old, boy, was he great. He was light on his feet in the infield. He threw hard. Well, now all of a sudden you're looking at, you check up on that kid 2 years later, and he's not in the weight room because he didn't have to be, because he kind of coasted by.
Yeah.
He's not any bigger and stronger. He's, and for whatever reasons, maybe he's, extracurricular activities have come to the forefront. So a lot of times that's what it is. I mean, you have to commit people, but then you have to tell them, look, you have to keep progressing on this trajectory or it's not going to work, between us. We want you here. We think you have the ability to play here, but you can't just coast through. And I think not all guys do, but I think some guys do. And then, sometimes there's outliers that lie in the weeds. And then at the last second, you're like, well, I really think I want that kid. Maybe he's a junior college player. He's 20 years old. He's 21 years old. I can insert this guy in my lineup right now.
Right.
I don't have room to wait for this other person. So there's, because of the early commitment stuff, it really puts a lot of pressure on the institution to make the right decision and not be held, not have that held against them if all of a sudden that kid's going to switch schools. There's, one of my longtime Epstein Online Academy students, great kid, Marcus Brown, from Arkansas, the middle infielder. He was all slated really early, committed to University of Kentucky. Like, I'm going to Kentucky. Boom, 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 boom. This is where I want to go. Beautiful facilities, like the coaches. Well, all of a sudden they had a coaching shakeup.
Yeah.
Last year, not with their head coach, but with some of their assistants, and he pulled his commitment because the guy that recruited him, left, And he was kind of bummed out about that. And so who kind of swooped in? Oklahoma State swooped in and was like, I like this kid, come on out here. And then boom, he switched he pulled his verbal commitment and then signed his letter of intent with Oklahoma State University. So it happens more than you think. And it'll all work out for everyone. Kentucky will be able to have an extra spot that they can fill with somebody that was probably on their secondary list.
Yeah, that story, by the way, reminds me of Dustin Pedroia's story. I read his book, years ago, and Dustin talked about how he went to into Patrick Murphy's office, who was the head coach at Arizona State at the time when he was a freshman, and he said, "Here I am, coach. You're starting shortstop." And Patrick Murphy looked at him and goes, "Who are you?" This scrawny 5'7" kid. Who are you again? That's to your point, though. I mean, there's a lot of guys who commit, they sign, and they don't even make it on campus, or they do, and they just things don't work out.
And sometimes your head coach doesn't know who you are.
Yeah,
I mean that's a big organization. Murph's a great baseball dude, and but it was probably like Murph had a lot of faith in his assistant coaches, right, to bring the right guys on campus. And they saw something in Pedroia, and he's probably saw his name on the board. I mean, I know he knows his name, but he probably saw his face, and it was like, I don't know who this guy is. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, Kinsler had to go to Mizzou and dominate there, which was good for them.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and also in that part of that story, he said there were 7. I think Pat Murphy said to him. By the way, not Patrick Murphy. That's a pitcher in the Blue Jays in our organization. Pat Murphy, former head coach at Arizona State. Said that after he said, "Who are you?" He said, "I'm your starting shortstop." Blah blah blah. He says, "I have 7 shortstops on the board to my left, right over there. So take a look." And that kind of opened up Pedroia's eyes a little bit. By the way, Dave Winfield interviewing himself. That's great practice for media training when you get to the next level for pro players. Any college players who are aspiring to become professionals. Maybe you should try that because it helps you out with a bunch of skills, including communication skills, by the way.
That's very good. I think Nuke Lelouch, didn't he, he tried to get groomed with that.
Yeah.
So I'm just having it worked out great at the very end of Bull Durham. It's great to be here. I'm just doing my best to help the team. Lord willing.
Yeah, I think that's more delusion rather than actual media training practice. Who would you say, really quick, just to wrap up that Dave Winfield story? That was a great story. I have one comp in mind, the only comp for him that could ever be plausible. I have one. I'll say in a second, but I want to see who you think it would be a great comp for Dave Winfield, just overall in the game of baseball. Because I haven't seen you don't see many Dave Winfields come along.
No, I mean, the only one I can think of, just because I'm thinking big, long legs, would be Vlad Guerrero Sr.
Okay.
Kind of had a similar build, right? He could throw, he could run, he could do anything.
But I don't know if he was the athlete though that Dave Winfield was. The guy I'm thinking of, Bo Jackson.
Right.
I mean, when I think of Dave and Winfield, I think of Bo Jackson, how similar they are because they're just so athletic, unbelievably athletic.
And so, I saw some highlights of Bo Jackson recently and how quick he was with the bat.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just like he was swinging something that was, 22 ounces. That's what it looked like a little wand in his hand.
Yeah, yeah. Coming up, we're going to talk about how to interpret some data properly. And when there actually is, we kind of touched on it already, but when there is too much information, how coaches at all levels, college, high school, college, professional, can benefit. But first, we're going to talk a little bit now about your new Ultimate Training membership. I got that email earlier in the week. As you've said, you're seeing a resurgence now, things opening up, seeing a resurgence at the lab. And there's now an unlimited membership option that's available as well.
We do. We've had a lot of players over the summer, come back into town that are college players. We're very fortunate down there. There's a lot of colleges in the state of Texas. My goodness, I mean, there's between the junior colleges and Division 1, 2, and 3, and NAIA. I don't know what the list is, but there's got to be hundreds of them in the state. And these kids work so hard and they train so hard. So because there's no summer ball, we've had a big resurgence of people. Hey, man, we want to train all day, so we have created a program where players can have full access to the facility. So not just our 8,000 square foot hitting area, but the outdoor field too. So they can come in, they can hang out with us. They want to hang out with us for 4 or 5 hours a day. That's cool. They can get their lift in. They can do their virtual reality pitch recognition training for an hour. They can hit for an hour. They can take a break, have lunch, and then come back, do a little bit more. Maybe take 500 cuts or 500. A lot of times we just do views. We'll set up really nasty breaking pitches coming out of those hack attack machines.
Yep.
And I won't have them hit the first 100 of them. Look, buddy, I want you to get your timing, and I want you to see the trajectory, what this pitch is doing from point A to B coming at you, just to train the brain to make decisions when they get out on the field. So anyway, we created that. It's been good getting players out there all day. It makes for a very fun, exciting environment, because usually every Tuesday we have live at bats. So we've had a bunch of college guys come in, some Texas Tech pitchers and hitters. We had some Arkansas guys that come in and they compete every single day, and it's good for our high school guys that are just graduating to now all of a sudden see this, because we have the Collegiate Baseball Classic. There's a tournament going on right there, which starts today, I believe, Friday. It's going to be on, I think it's on ESPN2, so I'll get to kind of check in. A lot of the guys that are playing in that, because it's in the same area, have been out training with us. So that'll be fun how they see them, compete a little bit.
Yeah, and again, you can, if you ever question Jake's work, just watch on ESPN2 today the Collegiate All-Star, because there are a lot of guys that work with you that are part of that game. So, and by the way, and Jake already kind of touched on it, as an unlimited member, you'll receive access to the hitting cages, hit tracks, the hack attack machines, which I love, the virtual reality machine. I also love that. I think it's great, for many things, vision training and whatnot. Balls, tees, strength and fitness, and an arm care program as well. You guys have an outfield, an athletic turf outfield that you use for some outfield drills as well.
Yeah, we do. We have full turf field that's lit, actually. So, we can do anything out there. We can play games. We can play inter squad. We can play simulated practices. We can take ground balls. We do a lot of infield stuff kind of during the week. Matt's a former infielder, so we're able to do everything, which is wonderful because of the facility that we're able to utilize right there in College Station.
Yeah. All right. Well, here's the thing, everybody. It's limited to a special group. I want to make that clear as well. Only 10 memberships available for the truly dedicated athlete. But again, I mean, if anything in life, you should be dedicated. But
that's right.
10 memberships available, and you can get the most out of your ability with this training. So, typical training hours for unlimited members. This is one of the big caveats as well to the program. It's 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Saturday. So it's very flexible.
It is, yeah. We have our membership training. All our awesome customers that were there before the COVID shutdown, and boy, they all jumped back. We train them 4 to 8:30 every single day, Monday through Friday. A lot of times the guys now in Texas and the girls are just starting to play on the weekends, which is great. We're starting to get games going on out there. But for those that maybe aren't part of a program, or younger players that are trying to learn the game a little bit more, we are available on the weekends to get them in there and get them as many reps as possible, because that's what the young kids really need. So
for more information, log on to thelabbcs.com. Sign up. I mean, limited memberships. They're going quickly. Again, thelabbcs.com. All right, let's move along here with the show. This is episode number 8, and it's our first installation of our data series, just doing kind of an overview of our data and what it really means, what it all has evolved to. And we're going to, in later episodes, in the second edition of our Data Installation series, talk about certain data points and metrics that involve hitters. And also, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. New episodes every Monday at 9 a.m. wherever you get your podcasts. We do appreciate all of the support and the listeners. We really do appreciate that. So we talked a little bit about how to interpret the data properly. And there's one thing, when you do interpret all this data, it becomes paralysis by analysis. And I've talked about this before on the podcast, how I'm a simple person, and you know how I am. I'm very simple. I overthink, and I can't imagine sometimes playing in today's game and what it would be like with all this data. I just like to cut off the fat on the steak. I like the sizzle. I like the steak, but sometimes you have to cut off that fat. When does it become too much? When is it paralysis by analysis?
Yeah, it becomes too much. I used to create very in-depth scouting reports at Mizzou. So I would tap into every possible resource that I had access to. So I could know, exactly. I wasn't guessing or using somebody else's radar gun. Like I was using TrackMan data to tell me how hard this guy's fastball, the last, 100 fastballs he threw, the last 100 sliders he threw, the last 100. So, here's his velocity range. Here's his video, kind of the depth of his breaking ball. Is it a 12-6? Is it, whatever, 2-7 or 2-8? How much break are we going to have on that? And then, what percentage of breaking balls does he throw to left-handers? What percentage of, stuff does he throw to right-handers? I mean, this scouting report was insane. And I was very proud of them. And even though it took me maybe 4 days to put together, and I don't know how many hours, 16 to 20 hours to put together this scouting report for this weekend on every pitcher we were going to face, it was way too much information to give to that one player. Okay. Yeah. So what I would do is, here's a pregame report. This guy, this is what he does. These are his averages. He only throws 55% fastballs. In this count, he throws this many fastballs. So, so I would dumb those down a little bit. Hey, if we get ahead in the count, there's going to be a 65% chance you're going to see a fastball here, right?
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden, I learned on that creates 35% doubt that it's not going to be a fastball, right? So if I gave that info to you, Jim, you'd be like, oh, it's only 65% and he's going to throw me a fastball here. You get in the box, you take a fastball down the middle, 2-0, and I chew your rear end like, you've never had it done before.
I hope you would.
And you're like, right. And you're like, well, it wasn't 100%. So you have to be able to tell the player what they need to hear. Okay. Yeah. So I would take all that information that I had, which made my brain exposed. And I'd be like, okay, here comes a reliever in. Okay. Here's what he's got. This is the shape of his breaking ball. This is how hard he throws. So, gear up. We've hit, 93 on the machines. Okay. His breaking ball is at 86. It's a kind of a hard slider. Okay. I've had that. Here's your plan. You need to go up there and look for a fastball early in the count. Don't miss it. Because I know that this guy's breaking ball will expose my hitter's weakness of his swing plane. So it doesn't do that hitter any good to look for a pitch that he can't cover against that pitcher. So data is awesome, and data is great for percentages. But you know what? What you don't know is how that hitter is seeing the ball and how they're feeling. Because sometimes what you have is coaches that are like, you know what? I'm just going to platoon everybody. There's a left-handed starter. I'm not going to play any of my left-handed outfielders because stats showed in the fall that my left-handed hitters, didn't hit left-handed pitching very well. But you know what? Maybe that guy's seeing the ball really, really well right now.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe he feels super confident at the plate. Maybe he's finding barrels. Maybe he's in a hot zone. I'm still going to play that guy, right? He's the best option that I have. I could go on a hunch and say, oh, well, this right-handed hitter hits left-handed pitchers better. When I look at my stats and I look at my sheet of over 200 at-bats, I have the data, but what is really going to work here? How maybe that other guy didn't sleep well. Maybe he looked bad in pregame.
Sure.
Maybe he, his girlfriend broke up with him, or whatever may have happened. So I think we can take data a little bit too far. Maybe in a 162-game season, it's a little bit different. You have guys that really dig into it and they're playing percentages. But at some point, you have to, create your starting lineup. As a head coach, you have to plug in the right guys.
Yeah.
And a lot of that has to do with gut. It really does. And you're around these guys all the time. But like I said, as a hitting coach, I would get as much information as I possibly could. And then I would filter that information to the young man that needed to see it. Like I knew my big number 4 hitter wasn't going to fit into those categories.
Yeah.
Like he hasn't seen fastballs when he's ahead in the count in 2 weeks. So even though the sheet may say, hey, this guy throws 65% fastballs or 78% fastballs ahead in the count, I know this guy's not going to get it. So I know that he's going to get breaking balls early in the count because that's what he always gets. And that's his scouting report. And I might tell him, hey, buddy, look for a hanger early in the count.
Yeah.
And if he's the type of player that can do that, he's going to be very, very successful. So you have to use data, but you also have to filter that data to your target audience, if you will, with your players. If you give them that much information, they won't even internalize it. They'll just fall asleep during the pregame meeting if you give them too much stuff.
Just to add some context, a head coach has a lot less even though there are a ton of things now that a head coach in college can turn to help him recruit and win games and make out his lineup, he is still very limited as compared to a big leaguer, even just a professional manager in a farm system. I would assume that the same thing goes for a hitting coach as well. So how does the use of data, because you coached at the Division I level, but you also have your foot in the water with the pro game as well as as a hitting evaluator and at a very high position. So how do you, as a college hitting coach first, what data are you interpreting to help your hitters get better, and how similar is it to when you flip and you're on the pro side of things?
If I keep it apples to apples, which would be more of not an in-game plan, right?
Okay.
So there's a difference between evaluating talent, finding the best player to fit, so this would be like the recruiting coordinator, and, what I do, consulting with, hitters, right. And draft hitters or problematic hitters that are in the organization. So what I look at, the data that I look at is, if I gather it, I'll look at blast data just so I can know what their average swing plane is. I can look at how much their barrel drops. I can look at, maybe triggers of their swing, how efficient they are, how long they're on plane. So I'll study really, slow motion video to see, okay, number one, does this person have the path to make solid contact to find the barrel? Okay, so that's kind of number one. I'll use that data. Number two, I really don't care about exit velocity because a lot of the players that I see, if they didn't have any exit velocity, it wouldn't get to my desk. Yeah. So that's kind of number one, right? But a lot of times they're international players that are 14 years old. Well, they're not going to have any, they're not going to have shocking bat speed at 155 pounds, right?
Yeah.
So I'm looking at, what are the nuts and bolts of their swing, and then I know that they're going to get bigger and stronger, right, and more athletic as they get older. So with college players, I'm looking at swing first. Okay, this swing plays at this level. I got to Mizzou and last year, and we had work to do to get the swings ready for 95 miles an hour, or we were going to get exposed. It was just kind of that simple. So we had to, make some small adjustments so that we could compete. And I'll tell you what, the first 5 or 6 weeks of that season, man, we just missed really good pitches to hit because our barrel wasn't doing the right thing. So that's number one. Number two, the second side of that is information for in-game. And that's where my dad was so great. And that Ted Williams, made him look at games in a different, that game between the pitcher and the hitter, how are they going to expose you? How is that pitcher trying to get you out? And fortunately, I have really good background. That actually helped me compete at a much higher level than probably my natural ability wanted me to. Yeah. Because I could think along with that pitcher a little bit, and I was a catcher, growing up, so I kind of had an idea of what was going on. So with that would help me prepare a plan for that hitter. So I would have the data of, hey, this guy throws, and trust me, college, the SEC is a different breed, right? You can't compare the SEC to a non-Power 5 school.
No, non-Power 5 conference, yeah. You can't compare it to the Mountain West Conference, basically.
Right.
It's just not, it's not plausible.
You don't, no, there's so many scouting resources that are out there that large, we spent, good money on good resources at Mizzou.
Sure.
And we were the most limited in the entire conference. So I can't imagine what, the other schools had access to that we didn't. Yeah. Just like I can't imagine what, I don't know. I mean, I go back to Cal State Fullerton. I guarantee you they don't have money to spend on a scouting service that allows them to see pitchers. Maybe they get access to the TrackMan data if they have TrackMan in their stadiums. I don't even know if Fullerton does or the Big West does. But you know what? A lot of those teams in the Big West and the West Coast Conference and small conferences around the country end up in Omaha every single year. So they're finding a way to do it without all of that information. And maybe it's because they don't overcoach.
Yeah.
Maybe they're letting their kids go out there and just play and perform. And they're not looking at the numbers and saying, oh, this guy's left-handed. This guy throws a slider. We got to take him out of the lineup.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not that simple.
And it's so hard to, college level, pro level, to strike that balance. If there was ever a team that struck the balance, though, it was last year in 2019 with the Washington Nationals. And I remember watching a couple of weeks ago Game 6 of the World Series from last year. And the Astros had a rally going. Well, Trey Turner was shifted to the right side of the infield. I think it was maybe Brantley who hit it right to Trey Turner on the right side of the infield, where if he wasn't positioned there, it would have been a base hit and it would have been a whole new game, and the Astros may have won the World Series. But that's where the data comes into play, where at the same time, if you look at Trey Turner's analytical numbers and his metrics from college, I mean, you probably wouldn't draft him as high. So that's where scouting and drafting correctly and the metrics and data come into play and how they combine so well and as a machine to produce winning. And I think that's what all college coaches are trying to do, and they're a little naive, I think, in my opinion, in trying to do all of that, because I don't think they have all the information and materials and resources available. That's where sometimes you go overboard one way or the other, and right now, the way the game is trending, people are going too overboard with data.
Yeah, that's cheating. Anything that takes away from hitters being successful, in my opinion, is cheating.
Okay.
So there should only be two guys on each side of the infield. No, I'm just
not a fan of the shift.
Just kidding.
No.
This is where data is super important, right? For defensive, purposes, because you're taking away, guys hit a certain way, and I know that, if I look at a certain swing plane, okay, this is where this guy's going to be successful when he hits it hard.
Yeah.
But this is where we can, even though he hits it hard, it's going to be on the ground and we can make this. So mechanically, I know why that happens. Defensively, that guy in the analytics department just says, oh, well, Brandon Belt hits, X amount of ground balls to the pull side at 110 miles an hour. We need to put our second baseman in right field. That's just kind of how it works. So when he hits the ball soft, it typically goes here. Well, we don't need as much coverage over there. So data is so great for, I think, defensive positioning. I think it's great for matchups. In the major leagues, look, you have so many players that have so many at-bats. There's so much data on them. That pitcher's been throwing for 4 years. Like, we know how hard he's throwing. We know how he pitches you personally as a hitter, right? I mean, you've faced this guy 50 times the last 3 years.
Yeah.
Let's just look at that. Let's look how he attacks you. Has he been successful? And then that cat and mouse game takes off, and all of a sudden that hitter beats him, right? And then that pitcher's like, okay, now I got to go 180 degrees. He figured me out. And that's something that you can't always have with the data. But I think matchups, and that's why games are like 4.5 hours now, because it's all about matchups. And defensive positioning, it's really, really, really important. And at the college level, there isn't that. Mm-hmm. Like, we don't have as much information. Well, how many at-bats did this guy have last year? 30. Right? I mean, a really good college player is only in, like 2 years. They're going to have 2 awesome years of data, and that's it. And then they're gone. They're drafted.
Yeah.
So you're not going to have as much information. So when you're trying to squeeze that information out of those players, it's not obviously going to be as accurate. It's still going to be better. It's going to lean one way versus the other, but not as much as at the professional level.
Yeah. What's your thought process with data? I mean, when you first saw all this data starting to evolve over the last 10 years, how did you decipher and pick from what is important and what could really get my mind into a tizzy and in trouble here?
For me, in hitting only data, right? Like, the technology, the the blast motion, right? It's giving us, and then before that it was Zep, right? There was a Zep company that was out there, and Diamond Kinetics kind of has stuff. So I would use it. Hey, send me one of these. I want to use it.
Sure.
And then, okay, does this match my eye? And it's number one. Does this pass my eye test? I know this player. Excuse me. I know, their strengths and weaknesses. How does that match up with what I'm seeing here? So that was the big thing. Then all of a sudden we got hit tracks, and I'm like, okay, well, how do I want to use hit tracks? Right? Okay, I like this. This is where you hit it hardest. You only hit it 80 miles an hour.
Sure.
Therefore, we need to make sure that you're consistently launching balls 15 to 25 degrees. You get over 25, it's an out.
Yeah.
Now, the guy that hits the ball 95 miles an hour, if he's at that, if he can kind of increase his spectrum, it doesn't mean that I want him hitting everything at 30 degrees. So you can whittle that down. So you have to use that with experience. What scares me is when mom or dad goes out and buys a blast sensor
and don't know how to use it.
They're just like, oh, we need to hit a ball, because you can tweak it to get a launch angle of some kind.
Yeah.
And they put a ball on a tee, and they're like, okay, you need to hit a ball this high off a tee, and in order to do that, they got to dump their barrel. And you have somebody else that maybe has an idea of what metrics should be, like, Blast uses things, and I really like their technology, but they have these additional scores that essentially made it more basic, for lack of a better word, idiot proof. If it's green, you're good. If it's red, it's bad. And it's not always like that. So I have players that are really good, and they have terrible scores. Right. But you look at their raw data, and their raw data looks good. So there's some kind of algorithm in there doesn't really fit with what I think, works maybe. So a lot of people will try to tweak that stuff to get into the green area. And then all of a sudden I get their video. I'm like, whoa, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Well, my this and that wasn't right. So you have to have somebody that has knowledge. And I think I was fortunate because I was teaching before all of the data and the resources available. And so I had a good understanding of how I wanted the swing to work and how it looked, because I looked at so much video over the last 20 years that now all of a sudden you stack data in there, and I think, now that's why it looks like that. Yeah. Okay, so I know when it looks like that, this is what the path is doing. This is the result of that batted ball. Boom. Now I can use 3 points of information, video, data, and experience, and now I can form, a conclusion for that player.
Yeah. A final question of the episode, and this is something that I think all coaches should really listen to. How could coaches overall benefit from all these new metrics?
Yeah, I think if they understand and use that, they have to use them a lot. You can't just dive into it. You have to use it and not change people right away. So you gather, different players. Again, this is baseball or softball, right? Here's my stud, right? This player's good. This player's all conference. This player's
number 2 or number 3 hitter in your lineup,
right? Yeah. Because I know that they can do it, and then I'm going to see what are your numbers. What's your attack angle, right? What's your bat speed? What's this? What's that? The other, you're not, for your youth team, you're not going to have an average launch angle, right? You're not going to have TrackMan, but you have an idea of where it goes. Okay, what do those numbers look like? And then you take this player that maybe doesn't hit real well. Boy, they sure have a lot of ability, but they just don't ever find the barrel. And then what do those metrics look like?
Sure.
And then you start breaking down video, and you compare the video to the metrics. Okay, so I see this little barrel dump, or maybe they come in too steep, or whatever it is. And then the result is this number that the metric is telling me. And then with this girl that's really on point, these are what her scores. And then you start to figure out what numbers are important to you. It's taken me, I've been using Blast, I don't know, maybe 4 years now, all the time. It's taken me 4 years to figure out exactly what I deem it really important and what I don't deem important, and then what my ranges need to be with certain players. So it is a dynamic movement for players. Look, you have a flatter swing, you need to be closer to 10 degrees at this point when you make contact. Or you have a steeper swing, right? You swing up a little bit more. You're a big power hitter. Okay, you can be this much based on what you're doing here. So they don't all fit in the same category. And it's not that easy to change somebody's mechanics if they have, say, they drop their barrel and swing up more than others. Well, you know what? You get away with it. You're great, right? I'm not going to change your swing. I'm going to tell you where you can be successful with that swing, right? So somebody like Aaron Judge is successful deeper in the zone. Somebody like Christian Yelich is successful more out in front. Is one better than the other? I think so. But that doesn't mean that you can make Aaron Judge Christian Yelich, or you can make Christian Yelich Aaron Judge.
And in case you missed Christian Yelich, our episode breakdown of his mechanics, that is in the archives as well. New episodes every Monday at 9 a.m. We are on a variety of platforms: Spotify, TuneIn Radio app, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, the iHeartRadio app, Stitcher as well. And the listenership is growing every week. We appreciate that. Be sure to find us and follow us on Instagram and Twitter. I'm at Jim Tara. Jake is at Epstein Hitting. And if you have any questions for the podcast, ask us anything, topic ideas, anything. And if you ask us enough questions, maybe we'll do an ask us anything type episode in the future. Jimbo Podcast 21 at gmail.com. Again, that's Jimbo Podcast 21 at gmail.com. Next week we'll be shifting gears, diving into hitting history overall. I mean, you have a hitting history with Charlie Lau Jr. and Sr. It just kind of going back a little bit and looking at here how we got to hitting in 2020 to the coaching, from the coaching aspect to how hitters are now, quote unquote, air quotes, made, how they're taught, how they're coached, why hitters back in the Ted Williams and Babe Ruth days use heavier bats, what hitting was like during the dead ball era with all those disgusting AstroTurf stadiums. Stadiums aren't ballparks, by the way. Baseball players play in ballparks. They don't play in stadiums. But they used to play in stadiums because they played on that stupid AstroTurf. So we're going to be diving into a little bit of hitting history next week.
That'll be really fun. That's fun for me because I'm kind of a history buff, and I've studied so many players that were, didn't have numbers on the back of their uniforms because they played so long ago, to players today that have to fit a certain mold. And that'll be really fun to dive into.
Be sure to reach out to us again anytime, Jimbo Podcast 21 at gmail.com. Thank you for listening. Stay safe, everybody, and we'll talk to you next week.